This is Mishnah in Depth Bava Kamma with Rabbi Alex Israel, and this is the fourth of 5 sessions. This Mishnah in Depth is a project of the Rifka Rosenwein Mishnah Division and is sponsored by her family in her memory. As we've been joining with Rabbi Alex Israel for these past couple of Sundays, this class, we are working with the standard Mishnah Yomit study schedule where you will dedicate some time on your own independently each day to learn 1 or 2 mishnayot, and over time you will complete Tractate, even and Seder. And to support this learning, our Mishnah in Depth includes a weekly shiur, where we will have the opportunity to review portions of the past week's material and go into deeper elements of the text. And it's been a pleasure to learn with Rabbi Alex Israel this past couple of weeks. He is an author, educator, and lecturer who teaches at Yeshivat Eretz Tzvi, Bidreshet Lindenbaum, and records the Tanakh podcast as part of the 929 project, among other things. And with that, I want to hand things over to Rabbi Israel.
Okay. So shalom. Hope everybody's well. Okay, we're going to go straight to our learning. And we're going to see what we can make of our topic. Okay. Let's just bring us back into the topic that we have. And for the last 3 classes, we've been studying the questions of what we call in Hebrew Niskei Mamon. Right? Niskei Mamon means, as I put on the left-hand side, chapter 1 to 6 of Bava Kamma is damage by your property, by your fire, by your pit, by your sheep, by your cow. But now the Masechet, and I think I mentioned, in fact, Seder Nezikin has 30 chapters, and in having 30 chapters, the question is how to divide them. In Babylon, they divided them into Bava Kamma, Bava Metzia, and Bava Batra, but some people want to suggest that really it should be divided into 5 groups of 6. So I'm not really, the reason why they say that is because if you can see, chapter 7 to 10 is thievery, personal injury when human beings injure others, robbery, and then the first 2 chapters of Bava Metzia are about misappropriating items and arguments between people about property, in which case you can actually claim that the first 6 chapters are about my possessions damaging you, and the next 6 chapters of in Masechet Nezikin are about me, me as a human being misappropriating your either your possessions or your person. Whichever way, as far as we're concerned, today we're going to focus on the question of personal injury, chozel umazik, as it is known, and this is Perek HaChovel, right? The chapter about injury. And I think and next time we're going to deal with Geneva and Gezela, right? The questions of thievery and robbery, where there are 2 different categories. One is when I walk away with something, I break into somebody's home and I walk away with something on the quiet, and the other one where it's a violent crime, right? Where I actually, do a bank robbery or I mug somebody in the street or whatever it might be. One is when you take something that belongs to somebody else and nobody knows, and the other one is when it's in public, and we're going to deal with the difference between Geneva and Gezela and the various different manifestations of that particular those halachots, and that will be next time, please God. Today we're going to try and spend our time on the questions of hachovel. Okay, I don't know if people are following the Mishnah Yomit schedule, you might not quite have got up to this chapter. But it was either a choice of doing this before you get there or doing Gezela before you get there. And I think this is more self-contained, so this made more sense. So I hope this will help people. By the way, if anybody needs the sheet, the link is in the chat, so feel free to download it if you would like. Okay, great. Let's begin with the first Mishnah, where the first Mishnah is going to already introduce the way that the rabbis looked at this topic. In a minute, I'll go back to the Tanakh. But in the meantime, let's take a look at what happens. Hachovel b'chavero chayev alav mishum chamisha dvarim. If a person injures another human being, another Jew, chayav alav mishum chamisha dvarim, you are obligated to pay 5 different counts of to somehow recompense them, and these are nezek, tsar, ripoy, shevet, and boshet. 5 different things. Let's translate those. You've got to recompense them for injury, for pain, okay, healing, their medical bills, loss of income, and indignity, okay, or shame, boshet, embarrassment, okay. Let's now what the in other words, if I have burnt your field, I have to pay your field. What did we see last time? If I've burnt your haystack, I have to work out how much is your haystack worth. Same thing if my ox gored your ox. But how do you assess the value of a human being, right? If you broke somebody's arm and they are a concert violinist and now they cannot play in the Philharmonic, right? Or maybe alternatively, they were somebody who barely used their arm at all because, I don't know, they work on a computer and they don't need a lot of strength and movement in their hands or something like that. I don't know. Think about whatever you can imagine, right? They are a radio broadcaster and they just need to talk. They don't need to do anything with their hands. So how do we figure out what is the value? So let's take a look. Benezek, Ketzah. So we're going to have to define 5 categories. And as you can see, they are, I'll make it a bit smaller. Here we go. I hope you can see highlighted here. We've got here Nezek, Sa'ar, Ripoy, Shevet, and Boshet, right? And in English, injury, pain, healing, loss of income, and shame, indignity or embarrassment or whatever it is, okay? So all of those categories we're going to have to define. So let's see how they define it, okay? Benezek, Ketzad. So what is the category of Nezek? Answer like this. Simeteno, katayt yado. What happens if you blinded somebody's eye? Or you, his hand had to be amputated. Shibat raglo, you broke his legs, so now he's got a limp. You figure out as if he is a slave in the market. So we want to put a value on your broken leg or on your hand. So let's say, now, by the way, this doesn't need to be a simple slave, right? This could be that there are different slaves. I imagine you in the ancient times, in the Roman times, this is when this was written, you went to the market and there might have been slaves who were expert musicians, and you bought a slave who could be a musician, or a slave who could be a expert chiseler, right? So he needed his hands. Or alternatively, you got a slave who would be a porter for you, and in that case, he needs his legs. So it could be there actually is within this category a differential. And it says, you see as if either he was a slave. In other words, you look at what... Now, I have to be honest, I don't know how this works in terms of earning potential, right? I assume that slaves earned less than free men. So if you're a free man and you were a violinist, as opposed to if you were a slave and a violinist, I don't quite know how this all comes together. But the first category is that we want to try and work out this limb that has been affected, right? If you are a, I don't know, expert photographer and your eye has been, now they only have one eye, then that's going to pretty much ruin your career as a photographer. So now, how you're going to manage this? Okay, so that's the first category. Second category, tsa'ar. Okay, if you burnt somebody with a spit, you took something very hot out the fire, and then it actually landed on somebody and they got burnt. Obamasmer, right? Or a nail. I don't know whether the nail penetrated them or the nail was just hot. But even if it was on his fingernail, makom she'ein oseh chabura, even if it's a place that doesn't leave a scar. Omdim kama adam kiyotze bezer rotze litol liot mitzta'er kach. How much are you going to pay him? We'll go around and ask, how much would you like? How much can I pay you to go through the pain of being burnt? Right? How much can I pay you of, right? So in other words, you've replaced him his actual leg, but you paid him for his leg, but you also need to pay him for the pain he experienced and say, how much would you pay for me to cut off your leg, right? Or to have that pain, right? By the way, the Gemara says maybe that's not a good way. You're not going to get anyone to agree to do that. Maybe you can get somebody to pay somebody. How much would you pay me not to do that to you, right? The question is which way? How much do you pay to inflict the pain or not to inflict the pain, if you understand what I mean? So there's a discussion about that. Whichever way, that's pain. Okay, category 3 that they have to be recompensed for. Doctor's bills, okay? So hikahu, if you struck him and he gets sick, or broke a bone or something, chayav l'rapoto, you need to nurse him, make sure you pay his medical bills to get him back to health. Alu botzmachim, okay? If he had all sorts of growths, or here it says sores, something happened to his body as a result. So there was like a direct, he got an infection, basically, right? Not only, but they got an infection and that became a secondary infection. In Machman Abaka, if it's because of the blow that he suffered, chayav. So in other words, even if it's not directly the wound that you inflicted, but now there are other, he contracted some sort of infection as a result of it, sepsis, God knows what. So now you have to deal with it. If it's shalom achman makah, if he got the flu and it was not connected, you don't need to pay for it. Right? If the wound healed, but then it opened, and it opened again, each time until it's really better, you need to heal him. But if it really recovered, okay? So you need to pay for his physio, for his leg, and if he, whatever. But if he's walking normally, and then he breaks his leg again in a car accident or in a bike accident, then you're not responsible. Shevet, the third loss of income. Now remember, you've already paid, let's say he's a concert violinist. You've already paid for the value of his finger, how much his pinky would be if he was a violinist. And if he was sold in the market and he was an expert violinist, how much would his finger be worth? You've already paid for his pain and you've made him better. Shevet, interestingly, you've already given him the value of his hand and his foot, so now it's just very basic compensation of a day laborer. How you look at him as if he's a watchman of a cucumber field, and you say, well, you lost, 30 days of work. I'll pay you 30 days of a basic salary, okay? And the last thing is boshet. And this is really interesting. Hakol lefi hamavayesh v'hamitbayesh. This is all based on the status of the person who is embarrassing you and the person who is embarrassed. Okay. So this is, really interesting. So as somebody who maybe is a politician, right, will experience greater damage about being embarrassed than somebody who is homeless, right? It's difficult to claim, right, that it's the same level. And likewise, right, if let's say a fellow worker, I don't know, insulted me, but if my boss or the CEO of the company insulted me, that might look a little different, okay? So it depends, and especially, I guess, in a class society, these things might have had a lot of influence. So if if a friend of mine made a sort of a joke and I'm a bit offended, that'd be one thing. But if the rabbi from the shul podium made the same joke about me at my expense, I might be much more embarrassed because it's a public act and I've been shamed in public, and the rabbi is a person of status, and therefore the shame. So again, here is an example of where somebody has, again, this is all happening within a personal accident, a personal injury. One of the cases that the Torah mentions, and maybe this is one of the ways that embarrassment comes through, is it's at the end of, getting my Tanakh, it's at the end of Parshat Kitetse in Devarim chapter 25, and it says, sorry, I'm just finding the place. It says there, chapter 25, verse.
Oh, if two men are fighting
Yeah, exactly. Verse 11.
and a woman grabs.
So if two people are fighting, one of the women comes to save her husband. Right? And she reaches out her hand and she grabs hold of his genitals. Okay? This is the example the Torah gives. Now, this is a very strange case, right? Because it says you should cut off her hand. Well, is there ever such a thing? But my point is, the Torah deals with situations which are intensely embarrassing. This isn't where she took a stick and smacked him on the head, right? But she actually exposed his underwear or whatever it is, pulled down his pants, so to speak. And so I think embarrassment is definitely part of this whole thing. And when it comes to embarrassment, notice, oh, they're going to quote it now. Look at the rest of this Mishnah. For those who have lost me, I'll go from where it says indignity or shame or boshet. All according to the status of the one who inflicts indignity and the status of the one who suffers indignity. If a man inflicted indignity on a naked man or a blind man or a sleeping man, he's still liable. So you can say, well, he's already naked. He's sleeping, he didn't know, right? But apparently, or he's blind, he couldn't see, right? Apparently, if he shamed him, now, by the way, is this only shame? Because we spoke about somebody who's chovel b'chavero, right? Somebody who wounds his fellow. What happens if you didn't wound him, but you just, made an ugly gesture while he was sleeping or something? If a sleeping man inflicted indignity, he's exempt. Obviously, he's asleep. He didn't know what he was doing. If a man fell from the roof and caused injury, right? So I fell off my roof, I landed on somebody and broke their leg, right? And at the same time, now that person fell over and was very, very embarrassed because whatever, their clothing all ripped in the street. He's liable for the injury, but not for the indignity. Why? Because he fell, right? Otherwise, I did injure him. So dignity seems to, the question of shaming seems to be a question of, at some level, intent. If I'm asleep, I don't know what I'm doing. If I fell, I don't know what I'm doing. And where do they get that from? As it says, she puts forth her hand and grabs him by the private parts. A man is liable only when he intended to inflict indignity. Okay? So these are the 5 categories of damage. And what Perek HaChovel is saying is that when you have this, you are, when you've injured somebody, these are the 5 categories that you have. Okay, it's a great point to pause. And if there are any questions, feel free. Yeah, Lise.
A question from Elise Brown going back. In terms of injury, where is knocking out a tooth answered?
So the knocking out the tooth is actually something to do with a slave. If you knock out a tooth's eye, slave's eye or his tooth, Parshat Mishpatim tells you that the slave goes free and all of that. But for a regular individual, right? So again, I guess there'd be a certain embarrassment because you don't want to walk around with a bad dental situation. You look awful, right? Second of all, there'll be pain. And so therefore you go, maybe there would be loss of income, if you had to go and spend a few days getting reconstructive surgery. So, I imagine you don't lose your value in the work market, right? Unless you can't replace the tooth. So you figure it out according to all these 5 categories. right?
So, sorry, Rabbi. So I guess my question is that it's really a question of life. If somebody doesn't have a tooth, it diminishes their ability to eat. So it is really a question of health. So I'm interested in this distinction between livelihood and salary and money, and actual instances of when somebody's life is changed because of an injury.
Right. In other words, what you're saying is what happens if now a person experiences pain in getting up every day out of bed, right? And they can work, but it's going to cause them that sort of thing. That's what you're saying. It affects their lifestyle.
No, I'm saying if you
That
can't
would go under healing, maybe.
if you can't chew, you can't eat well. I mean, you have to, especially in the ancient world. I mean, there's not pureed food back then.
Right.
So if you can't chew, if you can't eat, your health is going to go down the drain.
Right.
And I'm just wondering why, if there's some other category of where the injury that you do to somebody actually shortens their life.
I am not aware of any of these, but yeah, I don't know. Chana.
Hi, I'm just wondering, are all of these categories connected to an initial harm that was inflicted, or are they taken separately as the harm that was inflicted? Do you know what I mean? Like particularly for the indignity and shame, all right? Like you can cause someone harm, and as a result, you have to pay for the injury, you have to pay for the healing, you have to pay, but all of these separate things can be done, like, are they separate issues, or are they all taken only as a result of, I've harmed you as a result of this initial harm, these are the categories? Or is it,
You're saying,
I've embarrassed you, I've shamed you in public, or is that a separate issue?
okay, so it's a really great question. You're saying, let's say there wasn't an injury, do you still, is your question this, that let's say there wasn't really an injury, do you still pay for shame? Is that what you're asking? Or you're asking, is it shame incurred over the next 20 years?
Well, shame was just the most blatant one to me as being something distinct, but I guess the more
So it is a
general
bit
question.
distinct. Let me just show you another example. If you
Okay.
look, if you go down to Mishnah 6, right? Take a look at this. And here, what's fascinating is we just learned a Mishnah. This Mishnah is going to contradict the earlier Mishnah, right? So much so that academics say that there are in fact 3 different authors maybe of this chapter. But take a look at Mishnah number 6. Okay, Hatokeh lechavero. There are 2 ways to understand this. Here they translated, if you box the ear of your fellow. Some people actually think it's not box the ear, but it's in fact you yelled in his ear and you damaged his hearing, or you embarrassed him, you frightened him. You must pay him a selah. Okay? And Rabbi Yehuda says, in the name of Rabbi Yosef Glili, you have to pay him a mana. Right? If you slapped him, you have to pay 200 zuz. Okay, so I walk into somebody in the street. Now, what's really interesting is, let's say this person was as I said before, a politician, or let's say this person was, a famous academic. But also the other possibility is this person is just working in the pizza store. So is that, we just said that hakol lefi hamavayesh v'hamitbayesh. It depends on your status in society. But here they're giving standard amounts, right? You see what I'm saying? Yeah. If it was with the back of his hands, so if you slapped him this way, it's 200 zuz. If you slapped him that way, it's 400 zuz. Interesting. And these are cases apparently where just walking up to somebody in the street and slapping them, they give you a regular amount. This is how much. If he tore his ear, if he plucked out his hair, so I walked up to somebody and pull his hair, spat at him and his spit touched him, or I pulled his cloak from him, so I disrobed him in the street, or if I took off a woman's kisoy rosh, I loosened a woman's hair in the street, then you must pay 400 zuz. So here we've got an opinion here which seems to say that embarrassment has its own category. It's not necessarily related to particular injury. If you spit at somebody, they can just wash their clothes, right? Or wipe it off. But it's horrible. They're not really injured. Maybe their dignity is injured. And here they give an amount. If this I'm reading this Mishnah, let's just take a look at what happens. And then the Mishnah tries to so then the Mishnah sort of like corrects itself and says, well, this is all in a person's honor. It all depends. Rabbi Akiva said, no, even the poor of Israel are regarded as free people who have lost their possessions, for they are the children of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. In other words, there's an argument between Rabbi Akiva on the one hand and the author of the Mishnah. The author of the Mishnah says that when somebody is embarrassed, it depends on their societal status. Rabbi Akiva says, no, every Jew is a holy Jew. And here's a lovely story. It once happened that a man unloosened a woman's hair in the street, right? Here's the Hebrew, loosened, who uncovered a woman's hair in the street. I don't know whether it happened on purpose, by accident, what happened. But if Rabbi Akiva, Rabbi Akiva charged him for embarrassment 400 zuz. So the guy had an argument with this woman, and in order to get at her, he took off her head covering, which was very embarrassing for her. And Rabbi Akiva said, well, look up the scale. It says up there, you loosed a woman's hair, you pay 400 zuz. Now this guy wanted to sort of appeal the case. So he says, Amar lo Rebbe, tenis man. He said, Rabbi, give me some time. That's a lot of money. I need to raise the funds. And he gave him time. And what did he do? He waited for her standing at the entrance of a courtyard. He walked past and he broke a jug of 1 isar's worth of oil in front of her. Now, just to explain, 1 isar is not very much. Okay, it's a very small amount. So what he did was, as he was walking past, he dropped, a small, a small jar of olive oil, and the olive oil spilled on the floor. What did she immediately do? Now, this woman was exceedingly poor, and she didn't have anything. So he broke a jug of 1 isar's worth of oil in front of her, and what did she do? She took off her mitpachat, her beret, or her scarf, headscarf, and she scooped up the oil and started putting it in her hair. Obviously, this was good for her dry hair, or this was something that she liked putting in her hair, and it nourished her hair. And she was willing to uncover her hair in order to... She was obviously so poor, she could never usually spare oil for this. But oil which had been on the floor, that she would do. Now, of course, what did he do? He set up witnesses against her and came before Rabbi Akiva and said, Rabbi, should I give one to this 400 zuz? In other words, she's willing for a small benefit, which is much less than a zuz, right, to uncover her own hair, so I shouldn't be obligated. He answered, you've said nothing. If a man injures himself, even though he has no right to do it, is not liable, but others who injure him are liable. If a man cuts down his own saplings, even though he has no right to do so, he's not liable. But if others cut them down, they're liable. In other words, I don't care. So, really interesting, Rabbi Akiva, right, says that even the poorest people of Israel are regarded as free people, are regarded as aristocrats. It's not their fault they're poor, right? Rabbi Akiva is living under Roman occupation, and he says we would all be wealthy and aristocratic if it wasn't for the, Romans, and therefore he decides that he's the one, it seems, that he's not going to go in accordance with people's honors. Rabbi is going to take a standard form, right? Now, the reason why I'm talking about this is because it's a really interesting question about how you assess human damage. Somebody hurt me, how do you put a price on that, right? Like, for example, before we said, how much would you pay to have pain? If somebody has that, so sometimes people will. Sometimes somebody will voluntarily do a hip replacement. So they're willing to go through the pain and the difficulty because it will help their quality of life. Can you put a price on a hospital stay or whatever it might be in that sense? So this is one of the big questions. And I actually would like to go back to the Torah itself and show you how much things change quite radically from the Torah to the Mishnah. Let's take a look. I'm going to scroll down and take a look at what it says in the Torah. We already looked at this, but I'll show you what's, and we'll try and see. This comes back to is going to come back to the question of what we call ayin tachat ayin. I think they call that lex talionis. Is that the phrase, right? An eye for an eye. So let's talk about that for a second. I'm going to say, well, let's just take a look at what happens here. This is the passage that you see from Mishpatim, chapter 21. And it starts off with, Makeh ishvamet mot yumat. If you kill, you should be killed. Now that's quite significant. We don't do that in our society. Well, I guess in America they do. But in Israel and in the United Kingdom, there is no capital punishment for one reason or another. And there are other theories of punishment, as you probably know. One theory of punishment is retribution. Give person their just deserts, whatever they deserve. Others are deterrence. You give them a punishment to deter them. Rehabilitation, right? There's the idea of prevention, getting them off the streets. But most societies don't really don't go with us so much nowadays. I call it retribution, or giving the person, I think what's called giving them their just deserts, right? But that's the basis. Makeh ishvamet mot yumat. You killed, you deserve to die. However, va'ashelot sada, if you didn't chase them down, velohini naliyado, and there was an accident, so now you didn't. It's not murder in the first degree, right? It was chas v'shalom, a car accident, right? And you lost control of the car. Then you go to an ir miklat. I will assign you a place where you can flee. Right? And when you kill somebody through treachery deliberately, even if you go to the altar to get sanctuary, you will suffer the death sentence. So there's no way of getting out of death. One who strikes his father or mother shall be put to death. Let's just leave that for the moment. Maybe we'll come back to it. Now let's take a look over here. Okay? And you're going to see how things get a bit complicated. Verse 18 and 19. When two parties quarrel, and one strikes the other, be'even or be'grof, either he strikes him with a fist or with an implement, v'lo yamut, the person's injured, and he has to recover. Here, by the way, you see the source of what we said. If the victim gets up and walks outdoors upon a staff, in other words, if he survives the injury, then the assailant shall go unpunished, except for paying idleness and the cure. By the way, notice here, what are they saying? We said 5 things, right? Nezek, tsar, ripoy, shevet, boshet. We said injury, pain, doctor's bills, shevet, his idleness, and embarrassment. Here they've given just 2 of them. You see that? Let's just go down a little bit more. And when people have a fight, and suddenly one of them pushes a pregnant woman, and she miscarries. She doesn't die. So what are you meant to do? The husband decides how much the children are worth, and you're going to pay. So this is an example of paying. So we already had 3 examples of injury where you pay. The imasoni here. But if there is some real damage, not just damage of the children, but damage, We go back to this idea, nefesh tachat nefesh, like makev motumat, ayin tachat ayin, an eye for an eye. Sorry, 1 second. I've got a problem with my computer here. Ayin tachat ayin, shein tachat shein, a tooth for a tooth. Yad tachat yad, regel tachat regel, kviyah tachat kviyah, petza tachat petza, chabura tachat chabura. Okay, so a burn for a burn. Now you understand where the burn thing comes from, right? An injury for an injury, a wound for a wound, and a bruise for a bruise. Now, you will notice that there's a very different system in the Torah than there is in the Mishnah, correct? Very different. How do we deal with it? I will already say that many people want to claim that we actually are seeing several different types of cases. If you look at the case in verse, the first classic case is killing. If you murder, you lose your life. The case of the argument where you hit somebody and he had to be healed, maybe one of the reasons why you only pay for the doctor's bills and for his idleness is because if it's a fight of both of them, then in fact they're both culpable at some level. We both got into a fight. I hit back. It's not like somebody come along and hitting me. We both were fighting. So you can't claim that you weren't part of it. But you got injured, so there's some responsibility. But in this case, where there's a woman who's standing by and she gets hurt, well, then you're totally culpable. And here, right, what they're saying is in personal injury, the theme overall seems to be one of just desserts. Whatever you get is visited on you. Take a look at the next source, which I put here. You can see it on the sheet. Vayikra, chapter 24. Oh, sorry, here. If you maim a man as has been done, as has been done shall be due to him. Shever tachat shever, a breach for a breach. That means a break for a break, an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth. So first of all, we should realize the Torah seems to have two models. One of paying money, right, when it's something which is reversible. The woman can get pregnant again. The man is healed. Then you pay money. When it's something which seems difficult to reverse, like a tooth or an eye, that's not going to come back. Right? A break, I don't know what. So then you engage in retribution. What the Mishnah does is it totally makes this monetary. Or put it very differently, according to one, there's almost a sense of, how should I say it, like biblical cosmic justice. You cause a certain damage, the same thing should be visited on you. Now, that doesn't help the victim. If they knock out my tooth because I knocked out his tooth, that doesn't help him. It doesn't help him for his shame. It doesn't help him for his difficulty in chewing, right? It doesn't help him with anything. But it's a sense that, what's the phrase? Whatever you dealt, the card that you dealt will be dealt to you. The Mishnah totally changes it. There's none of that. The Mishnah actually wants what we would call in English compensation. Mishnah is totally based on compensation, which is quite fascinating, except when we look at the last Mishnah of the Perek, which we'll see. Okay? So I just would like to look at the Gemara and examine a little bit why the Gemara seems to have a problem with the lex talionis, with the eye for an eye, right? And I'm going to leave two mechanisms, but Lisa wants to ask a question, so we'll take this first.
Just a question. So I'm so intrigued by this. So are they accepting that things happen? Stuff happens. You got into a fight, you lost your tooth, and all of these laws, notwithstanding, too bad, life is life. I mean, is that sort of the attitude if the only recompense is going to be financial?
I certainly think that what they're basically saying at some level is that you can't play God, right? In other words, it's not our job. It's our job to make sure that the victim. It's interesting. According to the Torah, there seems to be a lot of concern for the assailant. The assailant should be punished, right? Whereas the Mishnah seems to be much more interested in the victim. That the victim should be, looked after, right? So there seems to be some now. It could well be that the problem is, and that's what we'll see in the Gemara. The problem might be that it's very difficult to, maybe my tooth is not the same as your tooth, right? Maybe when I knock out your one tooth, I'll end up knocking out two. Is my eye the same as your eye? That's basically what happens here in the Gemara. Let's just take a look at the top of page 4. Take a look at the Gemara here. Tanya Rabbi Dustai ben Yehuda Omer Ayin Tachal Ayin Mamon. So the idea is that an eye for an eye, says Rav Dustai, means monetary restitution. And they say, Ata Omer Mamon Ela Ayin Mamash. What do you mean? Why are you telling me you only pay money? The teaching is the one who caused the injury must lose an actual eye. So he says, Amarta Hare Shaita Eino Shelo Shel Ze Gdola Ve'eino Shel Ze Ktana. What if your eye is big and my eye is small? Or let's say your eye is good and my eye can hardly see with it because I've got a cataract, right? So then your eye is more valuable than my eye, right? So an eye for an eye. If the idea is, the whole principle of the Torah is that an eye for an eye, which indicates that I get what I gave, but that doesn't work with people. My hand isn't the same as your hand, right? You are a violinist, and I am a radio host. So for you, your hand's important. For me, my hand's not important, right? So they say, what about one who caused the injury? His eye is large and the eye of the injured party is small. How can I read it literally and apply the phrase an eye for an eye in this case? So they say, the Gemara then says, but if you want to say in cases like this, when their eyes are different sizes, the injured party takes monetary restitution from the one who caused an injury. So then let's say it this way, he says. If you've both got the same eyesight, so you've both got the same eyes, then let's do an eye for an eye. Only if there's a disparity, then we won't do it, right? Yeah. So he says, the Torah, he says, then he says, maybe you got it wrong. My kushya. Maybe the thing is, Dilma Nahora Shakamine. The problem is that you blinded him, right? Nahora Amarachman and Ishkolmine. So what's the Torah saying? Take away his eyesight. De'ilo temahachi. Because if you're going to say that, Katan Sharagata Gadol, Gadol Sharagata Katan. What happens if you have a 20-year-old who kills a 10-year-old, right? The Torah says, Mishpat echad yelachem, mishpat hashaveh lekulchem. And the main thing is, you killed somebody, you get a death sentence. That'll make a difference. If you were 70 and they were 30, you don't look at that. So maybe it's just that you took his eyesight, right? And they keep on going through this problem, which is, how do you make it equal? The world isn't equal. It doesn't work that way. So that's what's going on here. Chana, you wanted to ask something.
Yeah, just in terms of this attempt to, to base the punishment or the fine on the value of what was taken away at the time. In other words, if I'm a radio broadcaster, yes, it's true, I could probably do that without my eyes. But the point is that you've just prevented me from ever doing anything in the future that might require eyesight.
Right.
So, right. So everything that you're mentioning is a matter of that the punishment is based on the now and not what has been potentially lost for the future.
Right.
So where do they address that somewhere?
Well,
Okay.
so first of all, I think that is addressed in the system of the 5, because they say, if you were sold on the market, what would your value be? So obviously somebody buying a slave wants to use him for, manifold activities, right? And therefore that would be taken into account. But that's actually the problem with the Torah. The Torah is saying you cannot have a situation whereby eye for eye is actually fair, right? If you do eye for eye, in other words, there is some aspiration to create a sense of just desserts, but it's never going to be perfect. And therefore, since we cannot achieve that perfection of the Torah's ethic, we better just abandon it and go for compensation. And let me just show you the Rambam. Look at the Rambam here on top of page 5, the Rambam Hilchot Chovel Umazik, right? And then we'll maybe have a chance to look at something else. Zeh shneimar b'Torah, that which is the Torah's statement, Ka'asher yiteimum ba'adam kein yinateim bo, just like person who inflicted a wound, so they should be inflicted on him. It doesn't mean that practically the person who caused the injury should actually be subjected to similar physical injury. The intent is that he deserves to lose a limb or to be injured in the same manner. In other words, it's almost like an ethic of an ideal ethic he should do, and therefore Mishalem Niskon, therefore he should make a financial restitution. Do you see how the Rambam's trying to bridge it? He's saying there's almost like an ideal that really you deserve it, and therefore we will make you lose the value of this. But what would be the value of this? Well, how do you assess it? Okay, well, let's translate this lost arm or this lost eye into financial categories. I imagine insurance companies, by the way, do this the whole time, right? I don't know if anybody here is an actuary, but and he says, "V'hari Omer," and we'll come back to Velotiku Kofel and never shortech. We missed out this Gemara, but the Gemara, this is from Bamidbar chapter 35. Bamidbar chapter 35 is talking about the Ir Miklat, and the Gemara says, it says you're not allowed to take a ransom for the life of a murderer. In other words, if somebody killed, you're not allowed to pay their way out of the Ir Miklat. And they say, okay, you're not allowed to pay a ransom for the life of a murderer, but you are allowed to pay money for a limb, right? Moreover, you shall not take ransom for the life of a murderer. Implied is that no ransom may be paid for a murderer, but a ransom may be paid for causing a loss of a limb or other injuries. In other words, you can't put a price on a life, but you can put a price. And it's a bit of a rabbinic, chap. But if you can't put a price on a life is beyond anything. But you can put a price onto a limb. And now the question is, in the first Mishnah, what we saw, they try and use the system of 5 different categories in order to tell you what the value of a limb is. In that later Mishnah, Mishnah 6, when it came to embarrassment, they wanted to put fixed sums on it and say, well, maybe we should just have a scale. An arm is worth, 500 zuz, and a leg is worth 800 zuz, and, there's a fixed scale, and maybe it shouldn't be fixed according to the individual, or maybe it should. And there seems to be this interesting attempt to turn the value of things into financial. Once you've decided it's financial, then you turn it and say, okay, well, how do I come along with that? Is it fixed? Is it variable? And they come up with these 5 categories. Clearly, by the way, through the language of the Torah. The Torah mentioned healing, and the Torah mentioned burning, a burn, which is clearly pain, and the Torah mentioned, your time off work, and etc., etc. So they come up with these 5 categories, and now the question is, are the 5 categories objective, subjective, or the Torah's pattern, which clearly Chazal decide to abandon? Now, I will say, the last thing I'll say about this is, there's a very big debate amongst philosophers of halacha, because we always have this sense that, what do you mean? The Torah system is halacha la Moshe Sinai. The rules of, like we say, Shabbat says lo taseh melacha in the Torah, but that means the 39 melachot, right? We don't say that for 500 years we just had lo taseh melacha, and then somebody invented the 39 categories of forbidden work, right? We say, no, that was already part of the original system. So there's a very big debate amongst the commentators whether, there was a period. We don't find any evidence in Tanakh of anybody who was given an eye for an eye or a tooth for a tooth. We don't find any biblical stories like that. So do we say that this system of nezek, tsar, ripoy, shevet, boshet, these 5 categories of compensation were there from the get-go, from the time of Moshe Rabbeinu? Or, and that was the system, and that's called Torah Sheba'al Peh, and that's been there since the beginning of time, and the Talmud derives all these things from psukim, but really that is from time immemorial the way. There are other people who suggest, chief among them I've read in the writings of Rav Kook, where Rav Kook suggests that maybe there was a period where they thought it was ethical to do for an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth, and slowly that people developed and said, well, there's no way this can ethically work, and they went back to the verses, reinterpreted the verses, and came up with a system in a different age. So that's a really interesting question. I remember talking to one of my colleagues, and I was telling him I was teaching Baba Kamma, and his first question was, "What are you doing with ayin tachat ayin?" And I said, "What do you mean?" And he said, "Because a lot of Orthodox rabbis are very nervous about teaching it because people can get the impression that sort of like Judaism is reform, if you want, right? That in different ages the halacha sort of like new halachot are invented or whatever it is." And interestingly enough, I don't know about my friend, but Rav Kook was totally not fazed by that. Rav Kook said, yeah, ethics develops, right? Ethics go in different directions. Now a lot more people in the world are vegetarian than they were, maybe 500 years ago. And Rav Kook was very partial to the vegetarianism. He was pretty much a vegetarian himself. And he felt that, as we, once upon a time, slavery was accepted, and now we don't accept slavery. And similarly, he wanted to claim that the Torah actually has the tools for ethics to gain in sophistication and morality over time, and that the style of the rabbinic, how should I say it, the style of the rabbinic way of thinking is to be able to go back to the sources and derive new rules. And therefore, what we're actually seeing is a staged process. Okay, I hope we're good on this. I want to just do one last source and then we'll finish. And the last source is the end of the chapter, which is, I find, a very powerful statement, which goes back to not a question of compensation, but the question of how much we are actually in charge of our own bodies. Because once you say it's compensation, what do we say before? That you can work out, am I allowed to burn you, right? And how much will you pay me? And then pay me, right? And in fact, ultimately, if I've been playing around with the question of compensation, or whether you're doing some sort of offense that almost like it needs a biblical sense of recompense. So let's take a look at the last Mishnah of the Parak, which is fascinating. Okay, Mishnah 7. Okay, Av al pi shehu noten lo. Also, this is first of all beautiful. Okay, so first of all, Av al pi shehu noten lo, even though I pay you for hurting you or for embarrassing you, right? You also need to apologize. It's not enough just to get the insurance company to pay you. You need to apologize for the inconvenience, right? You rear-ended my car. You weren't watching. You're playing with the radio, playing with your phone. You need to say sorry. Shne'emar v'hata hashev et eshet, whatever it is. This is a story with Avram and Avimelech. When Avimelech took Sarah to his palace, and they say, and you have to go and return his wife because he is a prophet, and apologize to him. And Abraham prayed, and it says, Uminai va'ata shev eshet. So if you look in the English, it actually gives the whole quote. Therefore, restore the man's wife, and he shall pray from you. And then the person who rear-ended my car comes to me and says, I'm so sorry. And I got whiplash and I'm really annoyed, right? Because I can't go to the gym now for the next month. And I love going to the gym and you've whiplashed me. And now so I won't forgive you. So he says, how do we know that you shouldn't be cruel and you must accept the apology? As it says, right? As it says, Vayipalel Avraham Elohim, Vayipal Elohim et Avimelech. That even though Avimelech had taken Sarah away from Avraham, when he asked for an apology, Avram prayed on his behalf. So first of all, this is a fascinating ending. What seemed like a very technical chapter, right? Which seemed to say, okay, you've injured somebody. How are we going to get the actuaries in to give you some sort of sense of compensation? Suddenly we're looking for some sort of, how should I say it, like shalom. We're looking for actually to resolve things in a sort of broader sense. And now look at this, right? If a man said, blind my eye, I'll cut off my hand or break my foot, right? Yeah, I say to you, right? I want you to injure me. Please beat me up, right? Beat me up. And he does, right? Even I pay you. I say, pay me. I've got some weird, I don't know, self harm. And I go somewhere and I say, beat me black and blue. And he does. Okay. Does he? And he breaks my nose and he breaks my arm. Would he have to? I asked him to. I told him I want him to, right? He says, the Mishnah says, I'm just reading it in the Hebrew here. Ha-omer, sameteni, take out my eye, katat yadi, cut off my hand, shavor ragli, break my leg, chayav, right? He has to pay. Almanat liftor, I won't hold you to any responsibility on the condition that you'll be exempt. Answer is chayav. You're still obligated. But if I said, karat kasuti, shavoret kadi, chayav, if I say to him, tear my clothes, break my jug, you're obligated. If I say, almanat liftor, patur. So I can say to you, rip my shirt, I won't obligate you. He's not obligated. But if I say to him, break my arm, he is. In other words, there is something very deep, that's very wrong, immoral about personal injury. It's not just a financial contract. In other words, once the Mishnah has already gone into that place of financial, the last Mishnah comes back and says, one second, I'm not leaving the Torah. I'm not abandoning that sense that the Torah said that injury is actually wrong. And therefore, number one, there needs to be apology. And number two, you can't go around injuring people if they allow you to, right? You're not allowed to do that, right? Okay, so this is just a very interesting world of the world of damages. Is this sort of like an immoral offense, or is this just a financial offense? Is this like, my ox going in and eating your prized cabbages, or is this actually something deeper? And at a certain level, the Torah had this sense of ayin tachat ayin, shein tachat shein, yad tachat yad, which said, no, there's something cosmic gone on. You've injured a hand. You should lose your hand. And the rabbis shied away from that, maybe because practically they felt they couldn't make it equitable, equal. Maybe because they felt there was some other problem with it. Maybe they felt there were hints in the Torah. But at the end of the story, the Mishnah is still holding on to this sense that there's a sort of like immorality in personal injury, such that even if I tell you it's fine, you won't have any obligations, you're not allowed to do it. You're not allowed hachovel l'chaveron. So that's the journey we might take when we look at this chapter. Chapter 8, personal injury. I know we didn't get to all the mishnayot. I apologize, but there's a limit to how much we can do, especially if we want to make it interesting. And next time, please God, we will be talking about the difference between a ganav and a gazlan. And we will be talking about kefel and arban chamisha, right? The idea of paying twice, paying 4 or 5 times, and some fun stuff to do with that. And next time is our last class on Bava Kamma. Okay, have a good day, everybody. Lihitraot.
Lihitraot, take care. Looking forward to seeing you all one last time next week, and be well.